In 2007, one company sold half the phones on Earth. Not half the smartphones, half of all of them. 437 million handsets in a single year. $51 billion in sales, worth around $250 billion. 6 years later, that same company shipped 4 million phones, down from 437, and sold what was left of the business for scrap. Here's what makes it genuinely strange, though. Nokia wasn't beaten because they had worse technology. They had touchscreens before Apple, better hardware, more engineers. They lost anyway, and the reason is one most companies never see coming. Stick around. You have to understand how completely Nokia owned this. This was a Finnish company that started out making rubber boots and paper and somehow ended up putting a phone in every pocket on the planet. The ringtone was so universal it became a running joke. The 3310 was so indestructible it's still a meme 25 years later. At its peak in 2007, Nokia held around 50% of the global smartphone market. Not leading, not dominant, half. And in that same year, 2007, a computer company from California announced it was making a phone. Nokia's CEO was asked about it. His response, in essence, we have nothing to worry about. And honestly, on the evidence available, he had a point. The first iPhone was, by the standards of the time, a bit of a toy. No copy and paste, terrible battery, no proper camera. It couldn't even send a picture message. Meanwhile, Nokia's N95 had GPS, a 5-megapixel camera, and could survive being sat on. And here's the part people forget. Nokia had been working on touchscreen phones and internet-enabled devices years before Apple shipped one. The engineers weren't asleep. The technology existed inside the building, but Nokia was measuring the wrong scoreboard. They were winning at phones, durability, battery, signal, price, distribution to every corner of the planet. Those were the things that had made them king, and by those measures they were still crushing everyone. What they missed is that the product had quietly stopped being a phone. Apple hadn't built a better phone. They'd built a small computer that happened to make calls. And the thing that would decide the winner wasn't hardware at all, it was software and the ecosystem around it. And ecosystems have a nasty property. If you're late to one, they feed themselves. More users attract more developers make more apps attract more users. Once that wheel is spinning for someone else, you're not competing against a product anymore. You're competing against a crowd that's already gathered somewhere else. Then, in 2008, Google released Android, free, open, and handed to every rival manufacturer at once. Now, Nokia was fighting on two fronts, and the war was being fought on a battlefield they weren't even standing on. So why didn't they just switch? The answer is Symbian, their operating system. It had been built for the pre-touchscreen era, and it worked fine for what it was. But it was old, complicated, and written for devices rather than users. And rather than replace it, Nokia kept patching it, model after model, to protect the revenue it was still generating. By 2009, this produced one of the most quietly insane facts in business history. Nokia was running 57 different, incompatible versions of Symbian across its product line. Think about what that does to a developer. To make an app for the iPhone, you build it once. For Nokia, rewrite and retest it over and over. So developers did the rational thing and left, and every developer who left made Nokia's phones a little emptier, which made them less appealing, which drove more developers away. And underneath the technology problem was a people problem, which is the real story. Nokia had grown into a bureaucracy where being right was dangerous. Engineers who warned that Symbian was failing were waved off. Teams who suggested switching to Android were ignored. When market share slipped, executives blamed outside forces. Bad news simply couldn't travel upward, and that's the quiet killer in almost every giant that falls. Not that nobody knew, but that the people who knew had no safe way to say it. Everyone protected their position instead of raising their hand. The company still had the talent, the money, and the factories. It had just built a machine that couldn't hear itself. By 2010, share had slid from around 50% to roughly 30%, and falling fast. Nokia brought in an outsider, Stephen Elop from Microsoft. their first non-Finnish CEO. Internally, they had a genuine hope, a next-generation system called MeeGo. And on February 8th, 2011, Elop sent an internal memo that leaked to the world. He compared Nokia to a man standing on a burning platform, someone who must jump into freezing water because staying means being consumed by flames. Every word of the diagnosis was accurate. Nokia had missed modern touchscreens. It had no competitive app ecosystem. Its developers had scattered. But 3 days later came the decision that's still argued about today. Nokia announced it was abandoning Symbian and killing MeeGo, betting everything on Microsoft's Windows Phone, a platform with almost no users and no Nokia devices ready to ship. And that's when it went from decline to free fall, because Nokia had just publicly declared its current products dead, months before the replacements existed. There's a name for this: the Osborne effect, after a computer company that destroyed itself announcing a successor too early. Why would anyone buy a phone the maker just called obsolete? Symbian's sales collapsed almost overnight. Nokia's stock dropped 14% in a single day. And the Windows bet failed. Not because the hardware was bad. The Lumia phones were genuinely well reviewed. It failed because the app gap never closed. Major apps arrived late or never. Developers had no reason to build for a platform with no users, and users had no reason to buy a platform with no apps. The numbers at the end are hard to look at. Global smartphone share from around 50% in 2007 to roughly 3% by 2013. Phones shipped 437 million in 2007, about 4.4 million in 2013. Roughly 90% of the company's market value, gone in about 6 years. In 2013, Microsoft bought Nokia's phone division for $7.2 billion. The company that had put a phone in every hand on Earth was out of the phone business. Elop later summed it up in a line that's haunted business schools ever since. "We didn't do anything wrong, but somehow we lost." And that quote is the whole video, because it's almost right. And the way it's wrong is the lesson. They did do something wrong. They just didn't do anything obviously wrong. Every individual decision made sense. Protect the platform generating billions. Improve the phone you're the best in the world at building. Don't panic over a fragile gadget that can't even do MMS. Sensible, defensible, and collectively fatal. Because they were answering the question, how do we build a better phone? Long after the world had started asking, what else can this thing do? Remember Blockbuster? Same shape. Blockbuster couldn't let go of late fees. Nokia couldn't let go of being a hardware company. In both cases, the thing that made them dominant became the thing they couldn't put down. And the fall came not from a rival's brilliance, but from clinging to the version of the world where they were already winning. And there's one more thing worth sitting with. Nokia didn't fall because it was slow to see the change. Plenty of people inside saw it perfectly well. It fell because seeing something and being able to act on it are two completely different problems, and the bigger you get, the wider that gap becomes. Success builds structures. Structures resist change. That's not a Finnish problem or a phone problem. It's just what happens to things that win for a long time. The strangest part? Nokia still exists, quietly building telecom networks, doing perfectly well. It just isn't the Nokia that ruled the world. That one really is gone. Serious question for the comments. What was your Nokia? The phone, the game, the gadget you swore you'd never replace, and then did. I want to hear which one you still miss.